that now is the risk, I think, is that this could be something that Russia feels it can sustain that kind of effort, but the West and other Ukraine's allies will not be in the game for the long run.
Now, NATO foreign ministers are meeting later as Finland and Sweden prepare to join the alliance. Finland's electricity supplies from Russia are expected to be cut off today. Ukraine's president has said difficult negotiations have started with Russia over the evacuation of wounded soldiers from Mariupol. Russia's also thought to have suffered serious losses during a failed river crossing in the east of the country. I'm joined by the Director of International Security Studies research team at the Royal United Services Institute, Dr. Neil Melvin. Warm welcome to you. When we were trailing ahead, promoting what was to come in this show, we mentioned, as is being reported on Sky News and in the Daily Mail, that a coup against Vladimir Putin is already underway. What do we know about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, good morning. There's been persistent rumors, of course, that there is discontent around Vladimir Putin, but there's really been very little evidence that this is happening. Certainly, when the decision to go into Ukraine was first undertaken, I was in Moscow just before this happened. I think most people did not expect a war to start. So it was a decision that was not widely supported at the time. Though, of course, once it did begin, everyone began to rally round. But of course, as things have started to go quite badly in some ways for Russia, there have been rumors of discontents amongst some of the security services. And Putin has made some moves to concentrate power and sideline some of these groups. So I think that there's very little evidence of a coup so far, but there's certainly some thoughts about discontent.
There are also reports in the papers, the Times as well, has been hearing from an oligarch who was speaking to a US magazine, New Lines. The unnamed oligarch was recorded discussing Putin's health, and in it he says that Putin has blood cancer. Again, there have been plenty of rumours about the state of Putin's health. Does this back up the evidence somewhat? Does this lead us to believe that there may be an issue there?
I mean, again, it's really at the level of speculation. And of course, when we compare how Putin looks today to how he looked before, he certainly doesn't look well on some occasions, but he's also had there's rumors he's had a lot of plastic surgery, Botox, these kind of things. So it's very hard to know exactly what that is. But I would say we need to be a bit cautious about putting too much focus on Putin and his possible removal, because many of the views that underpin Russia's action towards its neighbors are very widely held amongst the Russian ruling elite. So even if Putin was to step aside or be removed, it's not clear that would mean there'd be a fundamental difference in how Russia is prosecuting the war in Ukraine and indeed sort of reacting to NATO.
We've also heard the threat from Russia to suspend electricity supplies to Finland. It was meant to take place at 1 a.m. This morning. Do we have an update on that? Do we know whether that's happened or not, Neil?
I haven't seen that, but I think, these steps have been anticipated. So I don't think it could be a particular surprise, even if Russia manages to do it. Often Russia makes threats, but then actually when you look at what's happened, they don't follow through. Finland, I think, has been preparing for this for quite some time. It'll be looking to its neighbours to balance its electricity supply, so it won't be an enormous damage to it. And it really, in a way, shows that Russia doesn't have so much it can do in response to Finland's decision to apply for NATO membership.
Let's have a look at Russia on the ground then. From what we understand from satellite images, but also from intelligence, how is Russia doing on the ground in Ukraine, with a particular focus, of course, on the Donbass region on the east of the country?
Yeah, well, Russia's had to adapt its war quite dramatically. You recall it attempted to do this blitzkrieg approach to seizing Kiev. That's failed. It then tried to take some of the towns or cities in the north, notably Kharkiv, but the Ukrainians have pushed back. So now it's focusing its efforts in the Donbass area, where it has very large forces. And really, it looks like Russia has shifted to a policy of attrition. So it's making sort of slow incremental gains. It's trying to grind down the Ukrainians. So Russia is really experiencing significant numbers of losses, but Russia has a massive military force. So as a percentage of its army, actually, these losses are not damaging to the point it wouldn't be able to sustain the conflict. what we do seem to be moving into is really this long-term attrition, a war that could go on for many months, if not even years. It might warm up and cool down. So it's going to be incumbent then upon whether Ukraine can actually maintain its initial successes. We've got new weapons coming in for Ukraine. The morale is very high, but it's going to be a very tough period of fighting, I think, in the months ahead.
And is that what Vladimir Putin's tactic might be, just to simply hang on in there? I think many people might argue he hasn't really had much good news to report back to Russia. Maybe the point there is that Russia won't be hearing that there's no good news to report anyway.
Yes, I mean, what they've done is they prepared the country for the idea that, in fact, they're not fighting Ukraine, but they're fighting NATO, and that this is an existential threat to Russia. So he actually frames the war in Ukraine as a defensive war against NATO aggression. And so what they're doing, I think, is preparing for a long-term struggle in which Russia has quite a lot of resources, and its military is actually designed to do that. We've seen the Russian military fight these kind of attrition conflicts in the North Caucasus in the 90s, in Syria, and indeed even since 2014 in Ukraine, in which you have regular casualties, but the war goes on year after year. And that now is the risk, I think, is that this could be something that Russia feels it can sustain that kind of effort, but the West and other Ukraine's allies will not be in the game for the long run.
Thank you so much for joining us. Fascinating as always, Dr. Neil Melvin, who's Director of the International Security Studies Research Team at RUSI. Thank you.